Good evening, everyone. Glad you're able to be with us this evening. We are in chapter 2 tonight of Genesis. Now, you may have run across this, you may not have run across this. It depends on what videos you've watched or people you've talked to. There are people in the world that don't want the Bible to be accurate and don't want the Bible to be true. And as silly as it sounds, some of them say, see, there's two different accounts of creation. They can't even have one account of creation. You're right. There is two accounts of creation. We went through the first account of creation in chapter 1. Now we're going to look at chapter 2 and that account of creation. And quite frankly, Genesis 1 offers a much broader, higher view. You know, you've heard that corporate term, give me the 10,000-foot view. Don't get in the weeds. That's more of chapter 1. It gives a broader cosmological view of the universe's creation, while chapter 2 really zooms in a little bit more on specifically like the creation of humanity in the Garden of Eden and the institution of marriage and so forth. And it's basically like if you were to take a vacation. And an example, Karen and Paul and I, before COVID, went out to California and saw some of the national parks and stuff. I can say, yeah, we went out there and we saw Yosemite and we saw this and we saw that and, explain it in a good 45 seconds. And then I might go in and then the next thing you know, I start talking more about what we saw at Yosemite or the baseball games we went to, just giving more information. And that's all this is just giving additional information to chapter 1. But if you haven't run across that argument, good. If you run across that argument, it's a very, very weak, very, very weak argument, but they still try to use it. Now, 2 weeks ago when we finished chapter 1, I finished it by going through chapter 2, verse 3, because we were going from day to day to day to day, and then chapter 2 starts out, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating what he had done. Boom. It's just a little bit of a different chapter break here. Stephen Langton did that 12:25-ish. Really, in my mind, what we're covering tonight starts in verse 4. That's where there's a shift in what is talked about. And we start here with the second, more detailed information about creating Adam and Eve and so forth. So I'm going to pick up here and read, starting in verse 4 of chapter 2. It says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Now no shrub had yet been on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground." Now, notice that, if you will, there. This is something we'll talk about when we start talking about the flood. But if you noticed, it says, but streams came up from the ground, from the earth, and watered the whole surface of the ground. Mists of water came up. This is how it's talked about. It never once says it rained on the earth until the flood. Think about that for a minute. I wonder how freaked out those people would be when all of a sudden water started falling from the sky. We'll cover that more in detail. I just wanted to point that out there once we get to that. But now, Verse 7 is I'm going to read it, and then we'll talk about it a little bit and actually go into more detail then. So he had 6 talking about how the earth was, the whole surface of the earth was watered. And then in verse 7 it says, "Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being." That's, there's actually more into it than that than you think. If you think about it, this is a pretty big statement. One, what is the breath of life? A lot of people say it's our soul. A lot of people say it's a theological metaphor for the divine origin of life. Sacredness and the uniqueness of human life. We are created, human beings are created completely different than everything else was created. Nothing else on the face of the earth does it say that God breathed into them. Nor does it say God even touched them or formed them. Here we have an intimate contact, an intimate interaction between the creation of man and God Himself that distinguishes our creation and who we are and what we are from the animals of the earth. Now, the animals are what they are. They can, if you've had multiple pets over your life, some of them can smarter than some of the others. Some of them can have different personalities. Some of them can be scared, and some of them can be whatever. But they don't have a soul. They don't have the breath of life. God actually creating them with His breath and with His hands. There's a lot talked about the direct impartation of both physical and spiritual life unto man. Goes on and talks a lot. Adam was merely a lifeless physical form made of dust until that happened, until God breathed into mankind. It shows, again, the unique relationship we have with God, but it also should point to a sacredness of human life and dignity of human life. We were put over the animals. We have now been given the right to manage, if you will, animals, consume, use them for our purposes, but also care for them. We have a responsibility to do the right thing. Let's see here. I don't remember delving into this part very much, but there's people that make a lot of why God breathed. Did y'all catch that? What it says? Let me back up here. Verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." There was a long rabbit hole about people going on and on and on about the difference between nostrils and mouth. I was a little taken back by that. Of course, this is not something that's salvationable or anything like that, but there was a lot to do made of it because supposedly when you breathe through your nose compared to your mouth, your nose warms, moisturizes, and even cleans to an extent the breath the air coming in as compared through your mouth. I didn't know that. Did y'all? Am I the only one that didn't know that? Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. See, you can run down some really interesting and really deep rabbit holes sometime, but evidently especially the Jewish people, make a big deal about God breathing in through the nostrils to give life to man and how meaningful it was. That's nothing salvational. That's just a side note. So let's move on. Verse 8. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden there was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now here's another place. People that want to try to find problems with the Bible, or because they don't want to believe it, point to this. They see, see here, God's already made man. And now he's making all of this stuff. Well, just a chapter before, he made all this stuff, then made man and this and that. Now God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and for good for food. Does it say anything there that, do you ever talk out of sequence? I was talking a minute ago about our brief trip as a family to California and talked about going to Yosemite. Now, Yosemite is unbelievably beautiful. I mean, it's hard to take a bad picture. It's so beautiful. But we did a bunch of stuff before we went to Yosemite. A few minutes ago I said, we went to Yosemite. I didn't say we went and saw the sequoias. Then I said we went and saw baseball games. Well, the first thing we did was see a baseball game. Actually, the first thing we did was see Hoover Dam. Then we saw a baseball game. Then we went to Yosemite. Then we saw this, and then we saw more baseball games. Don't let people try nonsense, because they will. So, no, there's not a timeline issue here that some people like to try and push. Now, we move on to verse 10. It says, a river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters. The name of the first is the Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Halabah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Aromatic resin and onyx are also there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It winds through the entire land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris. It runs along the east side of Asher. The fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. He brought them to the man to see that he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man and brought her to the man. The man said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Now, an interesting side note here, we always hear the term rib. We always hear the term rib. We think of one of these bones somewhere. But if you look at the Hebrew, it's actually more of like, it's almost like he just took out a big piece here, not pulling out a bone. There's a difference in the Hebrew. This is just in how we translate it. Again, this is not anything that is salvationable. This is not, he took a part of Adam from his side and made woman. Now there's a couple of things about that. Why didn't he just make Eve the same way he made Adam? Why didn't he just form her from the clay and the dirt and stuff and breathe into her nose? That's a good question. Why didn't he do that? Well, number one, we always have to ask the question, does it matter to our salvation or anything like that? No, but that doesn't mean we can't have questions and look at it. So we will move forward with this. Why was woman created from man and not just made? Why did God just not make her like Adam? That's a question I wrote across the top. Traditional commentaries, talk about her being made from his side, symbolizing, and now I'm literally going to read some things here so I don't mess up the quotes. It literally, some say it symbolizes that she is an equal companion meant to walk beside him. There's a popular rabbinic, other words, rabbi, interpretation suggests that she was created neither from his head to rule over, nor from his feet to be trampled, but from his side to be equal. We're all equal in the sight of the Lord, right? Yeah. Do we have, and we've talked about this before, do we have different responsibilities? Yeah. Yeah, we do. But that doesn't mean that one now see, people start taking things out of context. One of my favorite statements is, you have a man and a woman in a car and they're going somewhere. If both of them have their hands on the wheel trying to steer where they're going to get in a wreck. But if the man is driving the car and the man obviously pays attention to his wife's needs and her wants, if I was driving down the interstate with Karen and she's like, hey, I'm hungry, can we get something to eat? Or, hey, I need to use the restroom. Or oftentimes, stay in your lane. Or, look out! What person in the side seat hasn't done those things? Whoever's driving listens to them and takes all of that information into consideration. But when you're both trying to, no, go here, no, I don't, then you're going to have a problem. What I'm saying by is someone has to, be the final decision on some things. Because if not, nothing will ever get done. Or you're going to have problems. Now, another one, there's some, again, Hebrew literature talking about, poetically really, to be honest with you, talking about Eve being created from the man's side. They say the rib or the section of the body there is close to the arm and near to the chest. And again, this is just some things to make you think. I'm not saying these are, and some traditions say it represents God's design for woman to be protected under the man's arm and deeply loved by his heart. Of course, there's the one flesh statement, which they came from one. She came from him, so they are the same. That also, God breathed life into Adam. Thus, that was also part of her creation. This was the translation nuances. The Hebrew word is Tzela. That's why I didn't try to pronounce it. But it translates really to side. It doesn't translate to rib. It translates to a man's side. Again, does that really mean anything? No, not in the big picture. So, what are some overall high-level thoughts that we can look at in Genesis chapter 2 and help us today? We need to remember that we are important to God. And we need to remember all of us are set apart from animal. God literally used his hands, his breath, so forth, to create man. And we all came down from Adam and Eve. That means we are all part of that. There is an intimacy there in the creation. You know, some people think of God as this far-off being that, may know what's going on every once in a while. He's intimately aware of our lives. He's intimately aware of our actions. And he cares for each and every one of us. And that should be reflected to us in the creation of man itself. Now, another thing you've probably heard people talk about, it might make a good Labor Day message. Think about that. But Genesis 2:15 says that God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to, quote unquote, to work it and take care of it. We weren't just supposed to sit around and do nothing. That wasn't the plan. God literally gave us things to do. How long do you think it would have taken Adam to get bored if he didn't have something to do? How many people do you know? I know someone's husband here, retired. I think he kind of got a little bored, didn't he? And went back to work. How many people know other people besides Dale that got retired from work and started doing something else? Because they were not made to just sit and do nothing. God literally had a plan for us. Quite frankly, if you think about it, think about how everything is designed. Think about that just a minute. Think about apple trees. Think about cherry trees. Think about pear trees. Think about peach trees. Every one of them, to get decent production, needs to be pruned. Needs to be pruned in certain ways. The more the plant is cared for, the better the plant produces. We were talking about one of the ladies here this evening. Her son has grown a big garden and was talking about okra, and that's one of them too. The more you cut it, the more it produces. You have to stay on it, and it will. The more you, if you go out there every day and pick it, every day you go out there, there's going to be more to pick when it comes to okra. And that's true with a lot of things. I can tell you right now with squash and zucchini, go ahead and let you get them big old squash and zucchini about that long, about that big around. See how long it takes for your plant to die. You can't get too many. You don't want them on there. If you don't get them off, they're going to take everything out of that plant. And it's going to weaken the plant. So we were given work. And quite frankly, we were given a gift of work. We may not think of it that way today, of going and whatever your occupation is, you may not think of it that way, but it is good for us. But in addition, you notice there at the very beginning of chapter 2, it talked about day 7 in rest. We are supposed to have rest. And, he generated a pattern there, didn't he? Established work, rest. Technically, there should have been 6 works there. Work, rest. But there is something to physical restoration and spiritual reflection. Take some time. I know poor Amy, she's worked 2 months almost every single day. That includes Saturday and Sunday. That's why we haven't been seeing her. She's had to work. There's nothing she could do about it. It's not good for her. And her and Mike just went off for a week to get out of town so she could unplug. Well, also during that time, she hadn't been able to come to church. And that's not good either. We're not meant to work always. We are meant to have some rest there. And also the value of companionship. When God saw Adam, what did he say? It's not good for man to be alone. God created us to be in relationships. And I'm not saying God created us specifically to have a spouse. That is part of it. That doesn't mean someone that doesn't have a spouse is doing something wrong. That's not it. But we should have a relationship. We should be coming to church to build our Christian family because we will go through difficult times. And we do need people for help and encouragement. And that is important as well. Let's see here. And emphasizing the importance of fellowship in the church body and Christian life. The sacredness of marriage. Genesis 2 lays out divine foundation for marriage. God created Eve as the perfect companion for Adam, stating that a man and woman should leave their parents and become one flesh. That's verse 23 and 24. It's a holy institution designed by God and, ideally, and God would prefer it that way, as a lifelong unity of love and mutual respect. It doesn't happen because of the fall, because of sin in the world. It doesn't always happen, but it does. But another thing, too, here to think about. God just didn't tell Adam, there it is, do anything you want. Did he? He said, you can do this, and you can do that, but don't do that. We all need boundaries, don't we? You've heard, who's heard the term raising free-range kids? Kids do need boundaries. They do. We need boundaries, too. Think about how many warning signs and warning this and warning that and everything that's out in the world today has nothing to do with religion, but just to help keep you safe. That's the whole reason it's there. That's what boundaries actually are for. See, a lot of people misunderstand the Bible. They think, it's just a bunch of rules and regulations telling you what you're not supposed to do. That's not. It's not God. It's God wanting to protect us, keep us safe, because He loves us. Back to the old analogy of the hot pan on the stove. Paul comes in from work and I've made dinner, and say that pan on the stove hadn't been off that long and it's still hot. I'm going to say something to him because I wouldn't want him to go over there and grab the pan and start getting something out of it to eat dinner and burn himself. Anybody that cares about somebody, anybody that's just a simple, decent human being would try to prevent someone else from being hurt. But the world has told a lot of people that God's trying to take things away from you or doesn't want you to have fun. Who's heard, I'm having too much fun to be a Christian right now? Where do you get the impression that you can't have fun being a Christian? Well, that's kind of a silly thought. We'll wrap up there. Next week, we're actually starting a whole new segment of the Bible, of Genesis. Chapters 1 and 2 is about creation. And now we move on to the fall of man and all the aftermath. Not good aftermath, all the aftermath. So we'll start next week on that. If you have any thoughts, questions, anything, shoot us a message, give us a call, and we hope you'll be able to be back with us next week. We love you all, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.